G'day everyone, how you going? Check out this one with me. Here we go, Tartaria. Published 23rd July 2020. For the past couple of years, I've been getting emails on Tartaria or Khazaria asking what I thought about these theories. Although they are separate theories, mostly I lumped them in here for a reason. I will show you that they can be dismissed as variants of the same misdirection. The Khazars theory came first, and it goes all the way back to 1800 when Rabbi Levinson and Jean Uers, sorry for saying that wrong, published it for a few years. That is your first clue, and it is and always has been populated by the Jews. The idea that the Ashkenazi came from the Khazars in the southern Russian in the 8th century AD. Although it is true that the Khazarian leaders were converted to Judaism at that time, it doesn't mean that the Ashkenazi come from them. As I've shown you, the more likely answer is that the area was taken over by the Phoenicians, the Jews in that period, through trade and intermarriage. So it wasn't a conversion, it was an infiltration and subversion. But large parts of the world could say the same. Phoenicians had been taking over the world for 3,000 years by that time, and were covertly conquering large parts of Europe and Asia in those millennia. So to claim that a major sect of Jews came from a particular location like Khazaria is a misdirection. It is a misdirection because the Jews were pushing this theory they want to put you to everywhere except the right spot. They need to divert you away from the right answer, which is that the Jews come from the same place the Phoenicians come from, Canaan, Phoenicia, or Jerusalem. The Jews don't want you to realize they are equivalent to the Phoenicians, because that would destroy all their stories of victimhood. Added April 18, 2021. This also ties into the claim that modern Jews are not Israelites. Every time I run a paper touching on that subject, I get emails from people telling me these people I'm calling Jews aren't Jews of the Bible. For years I've been ignoring these people, insinuating it was a scam by the Jews themselves, but I finally looked into it. The claim is that modern Jews come from Khazars, who weren't Israelites because they didn't come from the line of Jacob. Jacob was also called Israel, and that is where the name Israelites come from. But if we look closer, this theory admits that the Khazars were Edomites, which means they come from the line of Esau, the brother of Jacob. But since they are twin brothers and grandsons of Abraham, the theory completely falls apart. I will be told Edom become an enemy nation against Israel, but that doesn't change any bloodlines. The question is one of bloodlines, not disagreements or nations. The only merit the theory has that it explains where the red-haired line of the modern Jews comes from is Esau means red, and he was supposed to have had flaming red hair. It confirms the biblical story as true history, at least in this particular, since the Edomites and the Khazars did and do have many red-haired members. We may assume the red hair in the British Isles come from the same place, as the Edomites become the Vikings of the Scottish-Irish lines. Well, it has merit in one other way. It explains the dishonesty inherent in Jacob's line. Since Jacob was famous for stealing by trickery Esau's birthright as a firstborn, this dishonesty comes through the female line, since the idea of the trick comes from their mother Rebecca. Jacob is then cheated by his uncle, so we are not sure why the Israelites are so proud of their past. Also, never explained is why Isaac, or God, allowed this deception by Rebecca and Jacob to stand. God himself seems unjust. The entire nation of Israel is therefore built upon deception and trickery and dislocation of God set to right. Knowing of the deception, God nonetheless confirms his renaming of Jacob as Israel. Historians and archaeologists admit the Jews and the Phoenicians come from the same place and have the same language, so they really have to jump through hoops to prevent you from making the obvious connection. They have to make you think Phoenicians crashed and burned completely at the time the Jews, the 12 tribes, were arising, and after the Jews were consistent punching bags of the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Persians, when the truth is Phoenicia never crashed. Phoenicia was extended of Egypt and was behind both Persia and Babylon. It is also behind Mycenae, Crete, Greece, Macedonia. The Phoenicians were also behind the Khazars and the Tartars, so that is the only way these theories are true. But the promoters of these theories don't admit that, of course. They want your eyes off that as much as possible, because the purpose of the new theories is to make you think Phoenicians, Jews, are still marginalized. They want you to think like Phoenicians are extinct and that the Jews are a small, struggling population descended from lost races like the Tatars or minor historical people like the Khazars, when the truth is the Phoenician Jew is now runs the entire world. They are the merchants and the bankers behind every government in the world. I have shown you the genealogies and proven this beyond a doubt, and you should have known it just by studying these people's names and faces. It is that obvious. But they have taught you not to trust your eyes and not to ask any questions. You see how Tartaria is just a variant of Khazaria? Although they promoted heavily by Arthur Koestler and his people back in the 1970s, the Khazaria theory never really took hold. So when my numbers started going viral in the past 5 years, governors could see that they needed another project of misdirection, and they needed it fast. Tartaria came out of nowhere in about 2018, and it had been promoted heavily at all the usual places, including YouTube. See Max Egan promoting it there right now. He is Jewish, of course. And at the same time, several other projects have also gone into overdrive, including the theory that the British Isles were founded by Sephardic Jews, but the Sephardic Jews are converts and therefore not really Jews by blood. When Scotland was Jewish for the spearhead of that theory? On the flip side, we have the theory that the Ashkenazis are not really Jews by blood. The Khazar theory plays into that one as well, since if the Ashkenazi comes from Khazar, they are again converts, and they are not really Jews. Someone badly wants you to believe that all modern Jewish people are not really Jews. I have been told, well, you are misdirecting in the same way, telling us Jews are really Phoenicians. Isn't that the same project with a different spin? Nope. Since in my theories, Jews and Phoenicians are just the two names for the same people, but they have the same bloodline regardless. They are no conversion or takeover, just a name change. No misdirection is going on. Since I am not pointing away from the Jews in any way, my theory doesn't diminish their blame in any way, it increases it, because you can see exactly who they are and what they have done, and how and why as well. The Jewish lie has gotten much, much bigger by trying it into the Phoenician line, you see, which is precisely why all these people promoting Khazarian and Tartaria stay as far away from me as possible. If I were really promoting a variant of these theories, they would quote me all the time. As it is, they pretend I don't exist. You will say that if it's true, then why do we see these people and countries fighting each other throughout histories? If Phoenicians now own the world and always have, why all the conflict? Two answers. One, a lot of conflict was manufactured, as I have shown. It was either made up from nothing on paper to cover the real events of the time, or the wars were manufactured and were partly real to generate profit. Wars allowed for the efficient movement of wealth and populations, and provide excuses for many events that would have otherwise been difficult to manage. Just like now, people can be made to do things in wartime they wouldn't consider doing in times of peace. 2. In the past, the Phoenicians were not completely cohesive and coherent. The world was large enough to allow for many splits, and some families took over one area while the others took over other areas. At first these areas were separated, but as the populations grew, the areas met one another, so you had family versus family. We saw that most recently in my paper on Jefferson when we saw the Dutch East Indian Company fighting the British East Indian Company for control of the Americas. That was Phoenicians versus Phoenicians. It actually had little or nothing to do with cleanliness or kings. Another small point on which new theories are accidentally right is that Tartaria theory claimed that the Mongols or Golden Horde people have changed in their historic portraits. The Khans are now drawn as looking like Orients with slanted eyes, so we connect them in our minds to China. But in the past they were drawn looking European or even Jewish with light hair or long noses. The first portrait above is one of the most people known as Genghis, but it comes from centuries later, and it's obviously just a Chinese portrait mistake as Genghis. The second is from even later, and there he is, has been made to look Indian or Arabic. However, most of the oldest paintings and drawings of the Khans, including that of Batu Khan and Tamerlan, or Tomar Khan, don't look anything like that. So there is definitely misdirection going on here, but not the misdirection they want you to think. The Jews are pushing this theory should never have gone there, because it points directly at my theories. I have shown you when the Coans have been the big winners in the Phoenician navy battles for supremacy. They were formerly the Comans from Armenia, and they are also Khans and Khans. Genghis Khan was really Genghis Khomran or Genghis Cohen. The last thing the new theorist wants you to realize. We are supposed to believe that Genghis Khan is a title, not a name. We are told his real name was I can't say that, sorry, meaning iron, and that his title Genghis Khan meant universal ruler. But that looks like your usual fudge to me. Clearly, Temujin was his nickname, kind of like Stalin, which means steel. Stalin wasn't Stalin's real name, you know. So we still have the name Genghis Khan to explain. No doubt Khan did come to mean ruler, but only later. Originally Comran or Cohen, a similar thing happened in Israel, of course, where the Cohen come to mean the highest priestly class. But that was become Commons or Cohens had always filled these positions. So where does Genghis come from? My guess it's just the location of George, both preferably come from G, meaning earth, which means Genghis Khan is just George Cohen. Bet you never thought of that. Once you realize this, you will find a lot of the obvious Jewish Phoenician names in the Mongolian list, such as Namian. We are told this is Mongolian for 8, and that the Namian were a tribe of the Khazar nation, being either Nestorian Christians or Buddhists, right? Anyway, we know they were there in the early bloodlines of the Khans, since the mainstream admits it. Here are some more clues. The Nam come from the west, and they were actually outnumbered Mongols in the Mongol Empire in the 1200s. But they couldn't have been Phoenician Jews coming from the direction of Armenia, right? Naman couldn't link us forward to Neman, as in Neman Marcus, could it? That's right, the Mongols still run Dallas, Texas 800 years later. Which could be why a guy hiding behind the handle, Corbin Dallas, is one of the most prominently pushing the Tartarian theory online. Hey, Corbin Dallas, wasn't that the name of the actor Bruce Willis played in The Fifth Element? That was his name. I've never heard this guy that's pushing it either. We are taught that the current Jewish surname Naaman comes from the German Neumann, but it's just another fudge. The Jews are no doubt happy to maintain the confliction and confusion, but the name Naaman was around long before. We are taught that the Mongols conquered Naaman, but that is reversal. The Naaman conquered local peoples of that region via trade and intermarriage as usual, and created story to cover it later. And what does that name Naaman really come from? This is so easy. It's one of the 12 tribes, of course. Naaman, meaning pleasant or graceful, was one of the sons of Benjamin. Hundreds of years later, there was another famous Naaman, commander of the armies of Ben-Hadad too. The Naaman is the name of Uruk, in Arabic, where it means the same thing. So that is where the Naaman and Mongolian come from, as well as the Naaman now. Sorry for saying this wrong. Not from Naaman, but from Naaman, the son of Benjamin. Genghis' son was named Jokai. This couldn't be the same as Jacob, could it? They were of the house of Borgian. That couldn't be the same as Borgia, could it? No link to the Bourbons, surely. They admitted these Borgians ruled Mongolia, north of China, until the 20th century. They also ruled Crimea until 1783. The last Khan of Crimea, who was San Grey. San is a Jewish name, so it couldn't be the same as San Grey, could it? No relation to the Greys of the British peerage, right? Grey studied in Greece and Venice. He spoke Italian and Greek. Catherine the Great took time to point out in famous letter that Grey was circumcised. What could that mean? He was preceded by his cousins, Salem the Third Grey But Salem can't be the same as Solomon, could it? No, that would be too easy. As you are seeing, we are finding Jews in turbans going back to the 12th century. We have recently caught them pretending to be Christians or Muslims, and we now see them. They have been doing it for almost 1,000 years. Other thing points to my theory, not theirs, is the flags we find. They tell us that this is supposed to be proof that Tartaria was an independent nation, not just a generical term for Western Asia, which is true in a way. We have been given clues here, not the clues they think. We have a griffin, phoenix, and an owl here. Oh, what could that mean? The owl appears on many Phoenician coins, since it was their symbol before it was borrowed by Eleanthea and Greeks. These implements behind the owl are the croc and the flail of Egypt, confirming a link between Egypt and Phoenicia. By the way, you can get one of these coins on eBay if you want one, a real one. If you want to know what the owl means to the Phoenicians, it isn't hidden. Both the Greeks and the Vikings were Phoenicians, and we know that they both held the owl to the symbol of wisdom. But the owl, of course, is the most covert hunter, gliding silently through the darkness. So while the dolphin is a symbol of their shipping, the owl is a symbol of their stealth. He is the ultimate symbol of covert operations, which is why the CIA and NRO love to use him. The second image there is from the CIA recent Instagram page, which they loaded with symbols. They only forgot the phoenix, but he is displayed prominently in their lobby. Where, oh where is the phoenix? Can you find him? He's peeking over the top of the shield. You will tell me that that's an eagle. That is what they want you to think. But that isn't an eagle, it's a phoenix. You'll say, come on, that's just the American bald eagle. Everyone knows that. No, the eagle symbol of the US was actually based on the two-headed eagle of Prussia and Russia, and that design goes back to Byzantium and Rome. But the confusion is understandable since Herodotus himself told us of the phoenix. The plumage is partly red, partly gold, while the general make and size are almost exactly that of an eagle. Historically, the double eagle is usually black, and that is because it is really the phoenix, charred in flames. At the last link to Wikipedia, you will learn that the symbol goes back even further to the Mycenaean and the Hittites, and that has always been a symbol of the empire. Since the Phoenicians were behind the Hittites and the Mycenaean, they are just proving my point for me. Eagles don't have two heads, do they? What does? The phoenix. Here is the coat of arms of the Byzantine Emperor John Palaiologos. No longer looks like an eagle, does it? Wrong tail, wrong beak, with these phoenix feathers on top of their heads. And who was John? Well, all the Palaiologos emperors were descended from him. Comans. John was also descended from Savoy, Counts of Flanders. They, of course, link us forward to King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, Mussolini's little buddy. Isn't Trump's cousin this guy? No, Trump's uncle, because Trump's father is brother. Indians also have their two-headed phoenix, though they call him the Gandabara. Sorry for saying it wrong. And it was used as an avatar for both Shiva and Vishnu. It has long been used by the state of Mysore, telling us of what to think of that. Mysore was ruled from 1399 to 1950 by the Wodai dynasty. Does that name look familiar? It should. Think of Woden. The dynasty started with an owl who comes out of nowhere. Yoda, Wooden. Odin? Sounds like Odin. It is just an Indianization of Wooden. He is actually appointed by the Harran II and ruled Mysore under 6 emperors. Those emperors all have ancestries, but Aldi has none, no parent. Since he brought the phoenix with him, we know where he come from. We can glean the same thing from the fact that while empire was struggling at the time, Mysore was expanding. It was a great center of trade. From this fact alone, we can also theorize that the so-called Dravidian languages of India, of which Kannada, the language of Mysore, is one. All you have to do is drop the R to get Dravidian, And do you really think that's a coincidence? If you do, you may wish to study all kinds of similarities between Tamil, Kannada, and Hebrew, and some of the Australian dialects of language are linked to Tamil as well. It is admitted that ancient Tamil and Kannada are pretty much the same, but the experts tell us there's no link between Hebrew and Tamil Kannada. They pretend not to know where the outside influence come from, even stating at Wikipedia that the influence probably came from with India. You have to laugh. Anyone who studies the question for more than 15 minutes can see that they're misdirecting. It soon becomes obvious that the Dravidian languages are showing a Dravidian Hebrew outside influence. They even admit the influence may have come from Tamil merchants. Who do you think these merchants were? Phoenicians, Hebrews, Jews. So why the misdirection? Because, again, they don't want you to realize that the Phoenicians have been in India almost since the beginning. They didn't start ruling the place only after the British arrived. They've been ruling it long before that, and still above we have already taken it back to 1400s. And with some more digging we could take it back much further. The same can be said for China, though I won't hit that here. It says we're looking at the phoenix again. Let's take it back even further. That's the symbol of the Archimedes, who ruled Persia from 700 to 300 BC. We studied them in my paper on Phoenicians, where I showed you they were infiltrated at the time by Darius. We are told that the falcon is most obviously our phoenix again. 3 balls are curious, and they remind us of the Mercati balls, as well as other balls of the later coat of arms. Those balls have never really been explained, although they may be on coins. Money as a symbol of the Phoenicians makes sense, but we should keep our minds open. The Mercati balls weren't usually circular but spherical and red. Coins were not red or spherical, and 5 with the Medes, 3 here. It also reminds us of the solar disk we saw in the Egyptian drawings and the carvings. At any rate, we can kill 2 Phoenicians with 1 stone here. It's said that the Archimedes also seeded the Orogen dynasty of Armenia, starting in about 570 BC. That indicates that they'd been infiltrated by the Phoenicians long before the time of Darius. Supporting evidence for the Phoenician foundation of the Armenian is the Aramaic, which was the language used by the imperial court. Aramaic is Aramaic, of course, is closely related to Phoenician and Hebrew, and the language of the early Armenia wasn't Aramaic at all. It was late Phoenician. Scholars simply choose to call late Phoenicians Aramaic, so it's just a matter of naming. You're supposed to think that the Phoenicians disappeared in 539 BC, so there can't be any such thing as late Phoenician. But since the Phoenicians did not disappear, we can simplify the language diversions and simply take both Aramaic and Hebrew as late Phoenician. Just as they admit that Hebrew is the equivalent to Old Phoenician, we can push them both forward together with later Hebrew, the same as later Phoenicians. Since the Phoenicians continued to run the Mediterranean after 500 BC, all divisions between the Hebrews, Israelites, Canaanites, Phoenicians are manufactured, including most of the language diversions. Also interesting is that Armenia was originally known as Hak. That reminds me of the name of Hayak, which we can now see pointed to Armenia. The mainstream completely misses this, of course, giving us the source name as Chet or Urban. Since the Comans come from Armenia, this also helps us peg the Hayaks. And if you still don't think the Phoenicians are the same as Jews, I'll remind you of something I haven't pointed towards you before. Do you remember who was famous for building Solomon's Temple? The Freemasons know, since they still feature him. Hiram I, king of Tyre, built Solomon's Temple. He was a Phoenician. The Freemasons will tell you that their Hiram was not the king but just a craftsman in the same event. They do this so that they don't have to mention the Phoenicians, of course. If you mention Hiram the king, people ask, king of what? But if Hiram is introduced to the story as just a craftsman, that question is dodged. See the wiki page for Hiram Abiff, for the Freemason ritual. Although the page does not mention Hiram of Tyre, Phoenicia does not appear on the page. Hiram also built David's palace in Jerusalem, so Solomon's temple was not a one-off. Hiram and Solomon were not just trading partners or allies, they were co-heads of the largest trading empire in the world. With Hiram, the first name of the heading, the company was Hiram Solomon, not Solomon Hiram. Hiram was building places and temples for the Jews, as he was setting up his in-laws. Why? Because he was. David and Solomon were Phoenicians. Don't believe me? Let's look at the woman. David's mother was Nitzaveh, which is a Phoenician name. The Bible is careful not to name her, and her name may have been erased to prevent us from recognizing that Nitzaveh is not a 12 tribes name. Historians don't want to tell us anything about her, like where she came from. Her husband Jesse is also scrubbed. Although we know his paternal grandparents, we don't know his mother. Solomon's mother was Bathsheba, of course. Her father is given as Elam of Glion, and since Glion is now in Israel, we were supposed to think Elam and Bathsheba were Israelites, but Glion is only about 6 miles east of Acre, and both were north of the southern border of Phoenicia at the time. Acre and Glion were Phoenician, so Bathsheba was Phoenician, which means Solomon was also Phoenician by their own rules. To cover this, most of the maps of the time give the entire region to the tribe of Asher. Sidon and Tyre are drawn within Asher around 1200 BC, based on the book of Joshua. But this, of course, is absurd. They admit in other places that Hiram I was the king of Tyre and Phoenicia was at the zenith in those years. This was during the Phoenician Renaissance. So how could Phoenicia be part of Asher? As usual, Phoenicia is just wiped off the map to suit the selective memory of the Jewish historians. Solomon was succeeded by Rehoboam, and his mother is given as Naamah, admitted to be a foreigner. Of course, that takes us back to the name Nam, confirming my analysis here. It looks to me like Nam was a Phoenician name from the beginning. A big clue in all this is it's also very revealing that they admit Naamah was a foreigner. They tell us she was the only foreigner among the top of queens of Israel. But, as you have seen, that isn't true. I suspect she was the daughter of Hiram. Why? Because it would explain why Hiram was building palaces and temples for Solomon and his family, wouldn't it? They tell us Naam was from Ammon, but it wouldn't make her a foreigner. Ammon had originally been anything east of the Jordan River, but the western part of it had already been taken over by Israel. It was the subkingdom of Gad, remember? Besides, Ammon itself was not really separate from either Israel or Phoenicia, and they admitted that the time we are speaking of, Shobek, king of Ammon, was simply a vessel of David, which of course means all of Gad, and Ammon was sub-kingdoms of Israel, so Edomite would not have been a foreigner. This looks like more misdirection to cover the fact that Naamah was a Phoenician. You will say, if the Israelites and the Phoenicians were really the same people, then the Phoenicians weren't foreigners either, so your argument doesn't follow, but it does, for two reasons. One, my point is that Naamah isn't admitted to be Phoenician because the historians have to keep the name Phoenicia out of the stories as much as possible. Even when they mention Hiram, they call him king of Tyre, not king of Phoenicia. Which should look strange to you? If he was king of Tyre, he was also king of Phoenicia, but they hope most people wouldn't look at key on that. 2. I am showing you that although Phoenicians and Israelites have always been closely linked, both being family extensions of the royal house of Egypt, in the time of David they become completely indistinguishable precisely due to these royal intermarriages between the house of Hiram and the house of David. In fact, this is one way they later hid the Phoenicians. The historians phased the Phoenicians out over the next several centuries, and one of the places they hid them in, the royal lines of Israel. You aren't supposed to realize that after the time of David, the Israelites and the Phoenicians were the same country and kingdom. Remember, this is precisely what the phoenix represents. Being born again on the ashes of your parent or predecessor. This is why descendants of the hidden Phoenicians have used the bird as their primary representation. A symbol, you would think it would be a little too obvious since the name itself gives them away. But, as we know, these people love to hide in plain sight. They don't think too much of our intelligence, and they have rarely been wrong about that. The Phoenicians went into the Kukan of their own making, manufactured by their own historians like Herodotus, Thucydides, Plutarch, and Pliny, pretending to be dead. Sorry for saying them wrong. They then rose up on the ashes, having become the Israelites, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Mycenaeans, the Mayans, the Americans, Armenians, and the Macedonians, the Romans, the Carthaginians, the Byzantines. Later they become the Mongols, the Vikings, the Goths, the Ottomans, the Franks, the Normans, the Scots, the Stuarts, the Medes, the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, the Stanleys, the Romanovs, the Sachs, the Cohens, the Goldmans, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, the Vanderbilts. This is why they love name changes so much. Every name change is like another cocoon and another phoenix, another rising from the pretend ashes, and another hiding in the past. Yeah, I was right. Corbin Dallas was Bruce Willis' character in The Fifth Element. Dallas was Major in Special Forces, telling me the guy behind the monkey and maybe from a similar background. Not many people know Willis was born in Germany. Wikipedia scrubs his mother, giving us no last name. Ethnic Slavs also scrub her, meaning they don't really want us to know her maiden name. Given that they admit Willis is a Jacobs, I would guess her name isn't something like Cohen. It would have to be something like Goebbels or Thyssen. She was not just a port in a storm for Willis's father, since he married her and brought her back to the US. She worked in a bank, so she must have known English. On her father's side, Willis is a Parsons, Jacobs, Mumford, Graves, Morris, Sterling, and Webb. The current queen is Webb. He also has an ancestor named Powuski, along with Captain Raleigh Croshaw. She helped found Virginia. His ancestor, Captain Richard Norman, also helped found Salem with the Baldwins and the Lockwoods. Though through them, he is related to the Burns and the Ferris. The Ferris link us immediately to the Howards, including the Earl of Norfolk. This links us immediately to the Talbots, the Stuarts, the Fitzalans of the 16th century. If we keep going back, we hit Henry VIII, John of Gaunt. Willis worked at Salem Nuclear Power Plant before becoming an actor. What are the odds, He also worked at DuPont. He was in the first episode of the new Twilight Zone in 1985. Despite almost having no acting experience, no resume, he beat out 3,000 other actors for his part in Moonlighting. Dallas is also a Jewish name, related to Dulus, Dalza, Dalzel. See my paper on Mussolini for more of that. Corbin is also a Jewish name. See Jeremy Corbyn, who pretends not to be Jewish so he can pretend to be anti-Jewish, playing the opposition. So the handle Corbin Dallas is another clue in the same direction. Tamerlane wasn't Tamerlane, he was Timurlane, or Timur the Lame. Mainstream now admits this fierce warrior was lame and withered hand. He couldn't mount a horse or stay on it without pain, and he couldn't hold a weapon. He could barely walk, since he was otherwise deformed, with one shoulder far lower than the other. These infirmities may have not been due to injury. He had red hair, but supposedly had Mongolian East Asian features. Yeah, right. Compare this story to that of Alexander the Great, which I have already unwound. Alexander is also sold to us as a great warrior, tall and hale, when in fact he was short, ugly, and deformed. Timur's story is currently under the care of historian Beatrice Forbes Mans, which should tell you that it's a usual fake. Another top historian in the field is Adam Knobler. Ditto, that's another Jewish name, a variant of Noble. Goes at the end. I think I figured out the number is the clue along with the colour. The Medes have the 5 balls plus the one blue one on the top, which always indicates their home base. Well, if we study Gandabara Phoenix, we find the same number 6. The Phoenix is holding 2 large elephants in his claw, plus 4 smaller animals in his mouth. So the bulls and animals representing planets. Only the planets up to Saturn were known until recently, and there are 6 of them. The Earth is the blue planet, of course, and the others look reddish in the night sky compared to the stars. There are 2 large planets and 4 small ones, so the big elephants represent Jupiter and Saturn. So there you go. Do you agree that Tataria is a bit of a distraction? I feel it. Feel it's a bit of a distraction, and now that it's been a couple of years, something else is just going to pop up to distract us, to keep the ones that do have logical thinking, keep them distracted so they don't follow what is going on currently in the now, so they get caught unaware. Anyway, like, share, subscribe or not. Thanks for watching. Much love. Bye now.